Rain fell softly over the city that evening, not in a rush, but like a quiet cleansing of forgotten pain. Inside a small, dimly lit cafe on the corner of Willow Street, a man named Daniel sat hunched over a steaming cup of coffee. His hands were calloused, the kind that told stories of labor and sacrifice. Across from him sat a little girl, about 8 years old, drawing hearts on a napkin. Her laughter was a fragile light in a world that hadn't been kind to her father. Daniel was a single dad, and life had forced him to become both protector and dreamer, even when dreams seemed like luxuries he couldn't afford. He had once been married. His wife, Lila, was the love of his youth, the one who saw the artist in the mechanic. But fate doesn't always measure love by its depth, it often tests it through pain. 2 years ago, cancer took Lila from him, and with her went his sense of direction. The bills piled up, his garage business nearly folded, and raising little Sophie alone became both his reason to live and his daily trial. That night, as he looked at his daughter's tired but bright eyes, he whispered to himself, "One day, it'll all make sense. I just need to hold on." But Daniel had no idea that life was about to turn completely, in the most unexpected way. Headphone: if you believe in kindness, second chances, and stories that heal the heart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel, Kindness Stories. Your support helps us keep sharing hope with the world. Yellow Heart. The next morning, as usual, Daniel woke before dawn, packed Sophie's lunch, and dropped her at school before heading to a luxury hotel downtown. It wasn't his usual job. He had taken a one-time repair assignment through a friend, fixing a classic Rolls-Royce owned by one of the wealthiest women in the city. A woman whose name echoed through newspapers and charity events, Victoria Langford. Victoria was the kind of woman who commanded a room without trying. Graceful yet distant, beautiful yet seemingly untouchable. Her late father had built an empire of tech companies, and she had doubled it with her sharp instincts. But behind that strength, people whispered about her loneliness, the husband who left her for fame, the business partners who betrayed her, and the emptiness that money couldn't fill. When Daniel arrived at her mansion's driveway, rain misted the air again. The car gleamed like a mirror, but its heart, the engine, was silent. Victoria watched from the terrace as Daniel crouched beside the hood, sleeves rolled up, focused entirely on the task before him. There was something pure about the way he worked, no pretension, no small talk. Just quiet purpose. "Do you always work like that?" she asked softly after a while, her voice calm but curious. Daniel looked up briefly. "It's how I was raised, ma'am. You respect what you do. Even if it doesn't respect you back." Something about his words hit her, perhaps because she had lived years surrounded by people who respected her wealth, not her heart. She watched as he adjusted the parts with patience, his hands steady despite the drizzle. When the engine finally purred to life, Victoria smiled for the first time that week. "How much do I owe you?" she asked. Daniel shook his head. "Just doing my job. You can pay through the company. I just fix what's broken." As he left, she stood by the gate, watching his figure disappear into the gray of morning. And for the first time in a long while, Victoria Langford felt something unfamiliar, admiration for a man who seemed content with little, yet rich in all the ways she wasn't. Days turned into weeks. A few days later, Daniel received a call from Victoria's assistant. She wanted him to handle maintenance on all her vintage cars. The pay was generous, far more than he expected. But more than money, it was the gentle tone of her voice when she said, "You remind me of something I've lost," that lingered in his mind. Their paths began crossing more often. Sometimes Sophie came along, sitting on the mansion steps sketching flowers while her father worked. Victoria would bring her cookies or ask her about school. The little girl's laughter began to echo through the empty marble halls, halls that had long forgotten joy. It didn't take long before people began to notice the change in Victoria. The woman once known for her icy composure now smiled more, stayed home more, and seemed softer somehow. Her staff whispered about the humble mechanic and the glow he seemed to bring wherever he went. But not everyone was kind. At one charity gala, a journalist asked bluntly, "Ms. Langford, is it true you've been spending time with a mechanic from Willow Street? Some say it's unusual company for someone of your status." Victoria's lips curved into a polite smile, but inside, her heart ached. She had spent her whole life living by the world's expectations. Now, for the first time, she wanted something real, not approval. Meanwhile, Daniel began feeling something he couldn't quite name. The more he saw her, the more he realized she wasn't the woman the tabloids painted. She was strong, yes, but also human, deeply lonely, and longing for someone to see her beyond the headlines. One evening, she visited his small garage without warning. Sophie was there, painting her school project while Daniel cleaned up. Victoria stepped in quietly, her high heels tapping softly on the concrete floor. She looked around at the modest space, the smell of oil, the old radio, the warmth of a home built not from money but love. "You built all this alone?" she asked gently. Daniel smiled faintly. "With help from a little girl and a lot of faith." She nodded, her eyes glistening. "Faith. I used to have that once." They stood in silence for a long moment before she whispered, "Do you ever get tired of doing everything alone?" Daniel looked at her, then at Sophie, who was humming to herself. "Sometimes. But I'd rather be alone and honest, than surrounded by people who only pretend to care." That night, something shifted between them, an unspoken connection that words couldn't define. Weeks later, Victoria fell ill unexpectedly. Exhaustion and stress had caught up to her. When Daniel heard, he rushed to the hospital, surprising everyone, including her board members who stood awkwardly in their designer suits. He brought flowers, simple daisies, not roses, and quietly sat by her bed. "You shouldn't have come," she said weakly. "I fix things," he replied. "Even people, sometimes." She smiled faintly, her eyes filling with tears. "And who fixes you, Daniel?" He didn't answer. He just looked at her, the woman who had everything yet wanted something only he could give, sincerity. After she recovered, she disappeared for a while. Rumors swirled, that she was stepping down from her companies, that she had traveled abroad, that she was selling her mansion. Daniel didn't reach out. He didn't feel he had the right. Until one rainy afternoon, months later, he heard a knock at his garage door. He opened it to find her standing there, drenched, holding an envelope. Before he could speak, she knelt down, right there on the oil-stained floor, and whispered, "I've spent my whole life surrounded by people who wanted my money. You're the first man who never asked for anything. Daniel, I need a man who'll care for me, not what I have. I need you." The room fell silent except for the soft patter of rain outside. Sophie peeked from behind a curtain, wide-eyed. Daniel stood frozen, heart pounding. Weeks later, everyone who had gathered outside, unexpectedly, the staff, the neighbors, exhaustion and stress had caught up as the most powerful woman in the city. When Daniel heard, before a man he rushed to the hospital, but decency, surprising everyone, slowly, including her board members who stood awkwardly in their designer suits. "Victoria," he brought flowers, quietly, "you don't need daisies, a man to care for not you. Roses, and quietly you just need someone who won't stop believing in you. You shouldn't even have when you don't believe," she said weakly. "But if you'll have things," he replied, "I'll walk beside you, even not behind you." Sometimes. Tears streamed down her face as she nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "That's all I ever wanted." "And who fixes you?" The months that followed were nothing short of transformative. He didn't answer. Victoria sold her mansion, the woman who had everything yet wanted something only he could give, once overlooked, sincerity. Starting with Daniel's garage. After she recovered, she disappeared for a while. They opened a community workshop, rumors teaching single parents that she was stepping down from her companies, that she had traveled abroad, called it Mom's that she was selling her mansion. Because, as she said, Daniel didn't reach out when people choose kindness. He didn't feel he had the right. One evening, as the sun dipped low, rainy afternoon, painting the sky gold, later, Daniel heard a knock beside the garage door outside the new workshop. He opened it to find her standing there. They watched families laughing, holding an envelope, and the faint hum of life returning to a once-forgotten she knelt down, right there on the oil-stained floor, to him and whispered, "I've spent my whole life surrounded by people who wanted my everything. You're
But
the
I
first
think
man who never asked for anything.
I finally found it.
Daniel, I
Daniel
need a man
smiled.
who'll care for me, not
Sometimes
what I have.
you
You have to lose everything that
I
doesn't
need
matter
you.
to make room for what
The
does.
room
fell silent except
She
for the
slipped her
soft
hand
patter
into
of rain
his,
outside.
and in
that moment, it was
Sophie
clear
peeked from
the
behind a
millionaire
curtain,
and the mechanic
wide-eyed.
weren't opposites. Daniel stood frozen.
They were two halves of the same
heart-pounding.
story.
One built
Everyone
on
who
loss,
had gathered
the
outside,
other on love,
the staff,
both meeting
the
in
neighbors,
the middle of kindness.
watched in disbelief as the most
Yellow
powerful
if this
woman
story
in the city
touched your
knelt
heart,
before a man
please
who
like,
had nothing
share,
but decency.
and subscribe to Kindness
Slowly,
Stories. Daniel reached down,
Your engagement
helping
keeps
her up.
these
stories of love,
Victoria,
hope, and
he
second
said
chances
quietly,
alive. You don't need a man to care for you. You just need someone who won't stop believing in you, even when you don't believe in yourself. But if you'll have me, I'll walk beside you, not behind you. Tears streamed down her face as she nodded. That's all I ever wanted. The months that followed were nothing short of transformative. Victoria sold her mansion and invested in rebuilding the small businesses she once overlooked, starting with Daniel's garage. Together, they opened a community workshop, teaching single parents mechanical skills for free. Sophie called it Mom's Angels, because, as she said, that's what happens when people choose kindness. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky gold, Daniel stood beside Victoria outside the new workshop. They watched families laughing, children running, and the faint hum of life returning to a once-forgotten neighborhood. Victoria turned to him, eyes soft. You know, the world thought I'd lost everything. But I think I finally found it. Daniel smiled. Sometimes you have to lose everything that doesn't matter to make room for what does. She slipped her hand into his, and in that moment, it was clear, the millionaire and the mechanic weren't opposites. They were two halves of the same story, one built on loss, the other on love, both meeting in the middle of kindness. Yellow heart, if this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to Kindness Stories. Your engagement keeps these stories of love, hope, and second chances alive.